Okay, good afternoon and welcome to chapter 4 of The Living Marriage as we continue with this interesting book about intimacy and marriage. Really, this is called Lesson 2, a deeper look at intimacy. For the sake of simplicity, I'm making it chapter 4. He divides the book into 10 lessons. This is Lesson 2. The first part is the foundation of intimacy. I'm calling that chapter 4. He starts off the chapter and he says, the Gemara in Nedarim says there's children of 9 negative traits. The Gemara says that a couple that engages in relations where they're in a state of fighting, they're in a state of hatred, the man forces it upon the wife, um, or they're intoxicated. Other different times where presumably most normal couples wouldn't be together. If you are together in those times, then you produce children who rebel against God, the Gemara says. So he doesn't explain all of these 9 types of relationships, but he does single out 3 of them that the Ravid, one of the Rishonim, talks about. The Ravid, the reason he brings this Gemara is because he wants to infer from the Gemara, meaning it says you're not supposed to be together with your wife when you hate each other. So therefore, we can learn from that you should always be in a state of love with your wife. It says you shouldn't be together with your wife when you're in a state of fighting, of bickering, of argument, to show that if you're in a state of argument, that's not a good marriage. It has to be the opposite, the exact opposite, meaning never getting into a fight, which he explains later on in the chapter. And B'nai Shichra is the last thing when they're intoxicated to the point that they don't know what's going on. So you have to, the opposite, the exact opposite, the opposite extreme of that is that they have to be fully aware and have the right kavanas, the right intentions to produce children that'll be tzaddikim, children that'll be righteous children. Now, what the Ravid does over here is he basically says that the Gemara saying if it's one extreme, there's hatred, there's fighting, there's intoxication, that's terrible. So therefore, you need the other extreme, and without the other extreme, meaning somewhere in the middle. Obviously, there's a middle ground. You don't have to hate someone, but you don't have to have the supreme love for someone. There's plenty of people that have mediocre relationships, or uh, relationships that are not neither hatred nor complete love of each other. They get along. They're not best friends. They're not enemies, but they're somewhere in the middle. A lukewarm relationship. It's very possible. There's people that constantly get into fights, and there's people apparently that never get into fights, and there's some people that get into fights sometimes. And the opposite of people that are completely not aware of what's going on mentally is completely cognizant and have the right kavanas and think that you're doing things l'shem shamayim, you're producing tzaddikim with your relations. There's a middle ground of just not being intoxicated and not having these supreme divine thoughts when you're together with your wife. So to imply that you need the opposite of these 3 things, I think is dangerous, and it's very dangerous what the author says over here. He bases this chapter off of this Ravid, and he says there's 3 levels of intimacy. The first level is the relationship itself, which he derives from what the Ravid is talking about not having hatred. He says, this is a really interesting thing. He says, a professionally created forbidden marriage. There are marriage counselors whose grasp of this subject is lacking. And when a couple on the brink of divorce approaches them, they try convincing them why separating isn't such a great option. Why is it a good idea not to get divorced? For number one, it isn't customary in our circles, right? In the frum circles, it's very looked down upon. People who get divorced, it's looked down upon. They're shunned from their community. Number two, what's going to happen to the children, right? If you have young children, maybe if your children are older, right? Each parent's going to try to draw the children to their side, take more custody over the children. It's going to ruin the children's upbringing, especially if they're younger. Number three, what's going to happen to the house and all the possessions? Do you know what a headache it is to separate the whole family package, right? Financially, it's very difficult. Number four, the process of divorce is very long and unpleasant. For all these reasons, the marriage counselor convinces the couple not to get divorced. In the end, this is what the author writes, after the couple has been pressured and convinced to stay together, the counselor feels as if he's successfully completed his job. However, he doesn't realize that he has created with his very own hands a state of affairs that could qualify as children of hatred. Children of hatred means that a couple decided for any one of many reasons that they would continue living together. Maybe one of the four reasons mentioned before, but the relationship itself is not an expression of their love, rather of their hate. Although Chazal describes his relationship as children of hatred, the children are simply an expression of their parents' negative act. Living in this way is itself completely forbidden, even if no children will result from the union. This couple is living under one roof like neighbors living in one building who don't like each other, but are willing to swallow their discomfort for the sake of the greater needs. Even if they have learned to live together without fighting by simply avoiding one another, any intimacy they would share while in such a state is considered immorality. This is mind-boggling. It's completely forbidden by the Torah. Okay. As far as the Torah is concerned, the marriage counselor has succeeded only to the extent that he has reignited a couple's lost love and brought them to a state of true shalom bayis. And true shalom bayis, he says before, is basically loving each other. See, this is very dangerous because he's basically saying that unless they love each other, then a marriage counselor should just let them get divorced. Now, as mentioned, these four reasons for not getting divorced have a lot of merit to them, especially if the children are young. It's going to ruin the rest of your life if you're divorced because you're always going to be bickering with the children and trying to raise them half by yourself, half with the other spouse. You're going to have to have a relationship with them because of the children. And a relationship now that's severed because you got divorced, and there's the animosity that you each harbor towards the other ex-spouse because of what happened, and it's going to be very difficult the rest of your life bring up the children that way. I think that's the biggest reason not to get divorced. After the children are older, you don't really, and they're married off, so that doesn't apply so much anymore. Maybe there is more reason to get divorced, but logically, you have to use your head. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to get divorced. It's going to ruin your life to get divorced, right? Doesn't mean they're going to hate each other. Hating is a very strong word. To hate each other is a very strong word. When Chazal say that you shouldn't be together when you hate each other, first of all, I mean, if a man and a woman hate each other, is there any possibility they're going to be together? I mean, in the normal circumstances, living in a normal marriage, unless you're like robots and say, okay, every Tuesday night and every Friday night we're going to be together, or every Monday night and every Friday night, twice a week, like the owner of a Talmud Chacham, because everyone's a Talmud Chacham nowadays. Um, so unless you're a robot, you're not going to be together when you hate each other. So you have to take a second, you have to think about this Chazal a little deeper and just say, okay, if they're in a state of hatred, they shouldn't be together. No one's going to be together in a state of hatred. Natural people, normal people wouldn't be together in a state of hatred. And people who are living together because it makes sense logically not to get divorced, I wouldn't say they hate each other. They might have a lot of disagreements with each other. And even if they do hate each other, does that mean it's a reason to, 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 to get divorced? It's forbidden to stay in a relationship like that. More often than not, they're not going to be really in a state of hatred. They might have times they enjoy spending together. They might try to reconciliate. So I think to put blame on marriage counselors, he's saying a lot of marriage counselors are like this, that they're doing a violation of the Torah, which is itself based on a Ravid's inference from a Gemara, which fails to acknowledge that there's an in-between stage between hate and absolute love, is a problem. The second thing, he says, the second level, right, which is talking about fighting, Bnei Mariva, the opposite of that is you're never in a fight, living in harmony, that the couple has to never be fighting. He even says, this is what he says. I'm taken aback that he says it. It says the Torah expects the general state of shalom bayis should be so positive that there should be no fights. The Torah expects that. And it says, as love spreads its wings over the home, the verse says, Kol Peshoim T'chasa Ava, love covers all iniquity. Right? A good husband, a good wife, they never get into fights. I don't know. I've been married for 5 years. I've been in a lot of fights. My marriage, I think I'm living a bad marriage. I have no shalom bayis. I have a great marriage, honestly. Doesn't mean you're not going to get into fights. The nat normal people, right, when they have disagreements about something, right? That's the easiest way of saying disagreements, right? one spouse has his perspective, one spouse has their way of dealing with the certain situation, or looking at a certain situation, or how to handle finances, or how to handle this situation with the kids, or whatever. Yes, there's going to be a lot of differences of opinion. The two different people. First of all, they're man and woman, which have totally different perspectives on life. Second of all, a lot of times they're strangers, that got married, didn't know each other so well beforehand. So inevitably, some disagreements are going to come up, and because people are normal, and people get angry, even though most Muslims say anger is a terrible thing, but normal people get angry, and when you have disagreements, a lot of times, a lot of tension, and it leads to fights, and people yell at each other, and I really think it's unhealthy if people refrain from yelling. You shouldn't be yelling all the time, but I think it's very important. In psychology, talk about venting. Unfortunately, in the Haredi society, there's a lot of, especially the women, and some men also feel that it's an avera to get angry, and because really, what the Torah warns about anger, it's not talking about anger being expressed on the outside. It's really the anger that's pent up in your heart. That's even worse because you have to let it out. You gotta let it out, otherwise it eats up at you inside. So it's any normal person. There's no one's born a tzaddik. No one's born a completely righteous person. And every person, even the righteous people, stumble from time to time. So to not have fights, and to say that a couple who sometimes fights is doing an avera, is living together, and when they're intimate, because even presumably normal, under normal circumstances, they're not going to be together when they're in a fight. But if they're living in a state of marriage where sometimes they fight, and when they're not fighting, they're together, and that's considered forbidden, that's a pretty serious thing to say. Um, the third thing he says, the third level is the union itself, that you have to have. He quotes from the Ramban. He says, "Also achibur, the time when you're together, me'eno nasa b'rov cheshek av v'ratzon." It has to be done with a lot of desire and love and will. Ein hashchina shoraba. Hashem is not present there. He quotes to the menorah Samaor. I don't know who this is. Mitoch avi yisera shikanis ba b'meisa achibur l'shen shamayim yitzeh zerach chazak u'bikeach b'noah. By loving each other at the time of the union. So therefore, I've heard this many times, therefore it will have an effect on the children that come out from that union. They'll come out strong, they'll come out beautiful, they'll come out smart. Um, I've heard from my Rosh Hashiva that you're supposed to, when you're at the time of the union, and when you're being together, uh, you should have intention that you want to produce sadiqim with your union. Um, and that really is important, he's saying, and it's necessary, right? If you don't have this, then you're considered like being together while you're intoxicated, right? Obviously, there's a middle area where you're not intoxicated, you're just having a good time, you're not just, you know what's going on, you're just having a good time. You don't have, you're not a big tzaddik, you're not having the right kavanah to produce tzaddikim. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And he says if you don't have this, you're doing an avera, you're doing a sin, you're doing something forbidden. Um, it's very dangerous, the conclusion that he's drawing over here. He ends up the chapter, the Gedolei Yisrael love their wives. I don't know why he keeps on talking about this. I think the reason is because the author was close to a lot of Gedolei Yisrael, and most of the Sefer is based on their advice. The fact that he's asking the question shows that a lot of people obviously think that they don't love their wives, and he says, of course they did. He says, anyone who heard Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's eulogy for his wife. Now, I've heard this story. He got up at his wife's levaya, and he says normally people ask mechila, they ask, you know, forgiveness from whoever the dead person, deceased is, in this case his wife. He says, I don't have to ask mechila from my wife. I never got into an argument with my wife. He doesn't have to ask forgiveness for his wife. He never got into an argument for his wife. Like I said before, I don't think it's possible for any normal human being not to get into an argument. Um, you know, unless you're someone who's holding back your emotions. And if you're holding back your emotions, it doesn't mean you're not an angry person. Someone who doesn't get angry is able to withhold the anger. It eats at them inside. The anger is still there, and it grows and grows and grows more and more and more. And oftentimes people, when they hold in their anger, um, besides the anger staying with inside, you don't have a chance to vent the anger. You don't actually get across, communicate. There's a lack of communication because when you get angry, you yell out what you need and what you want and what's bothering you, and you say it clearly. It's essential to communication to get into fights and to get angry and to yell. Sometimes you have to yell. I mean, that's just normal. That's the natural response of people. It's essential for communication. Communication is so important in a marriage that each spouse just has to know what upsets the other spouse and what the other spouse wants, what they desire. And if you don't know those things, there's no way you can have a decent marriage. There's no communication. The marriage is doesn't exist. There's no connection between the two. I'm going to talk about that in a second, but no one beside, right? So if you're not telling the other person what you want, what you're angry about, there's no communication, and both spouses suffer, and they don't know each other at the end of the day. So the Gedolim should love their wives. I mean, every gadol is a different story. I'm not gonna say in a general sense that all of them didn't or all of them did. Everyone is their own. I don't know what goes on going on in their houses, but I can infer from the fact some of the stories that I hear from the gadolim how, one gadol would spend 5 minutes a week speaking to his wife. Um, I mean, I don't know how it's possible. Even if, let's say, you were machmir in the mitzvah of ona and you were together with your wife 3 or 4 times a week. If you speak to her for 5 minutes a week, I think it's kind of hard to have any relationship with her. Definitely not love. Um, Definitely not love. Other stories I heard, one gadol, um, after Sheva brachas, he says he needs 1,000 days of separation from his wife. Now, this is there during Shana Rishona because after Sheva Brachas is still part of Shana Rishona, which is a mitzvah d'oraisa, to give extra simcha to your wife, to say you need 1,000 days to learn by yourself, and then I'm all yours. So not only a violation of the mitzvah d'oraisa and the Torah, but it's for sure definitely not a path to love in marriage. But this is not. I'm not going to harp on the gedolim. I just want to talk about it in a general sense. Comes out of this chapter over here is that you need to be constantly, according to the author, you have to constantly be in a state of love with your spouse. You have to never get into a fight with your spouse. And when you're together, you're supposed to have the right intentions to produce tzaddikim, to produce righteous children. When you're together, um, I think this is, missing the point a lot. And just to go back, because I want to make it real and connect it to where this is all coming from. This is a Gemara in Adoram. We're learning in Adoram. We'll get there, Daf Chaf, next week, I guess. Daf 20, but what the Gemara is talking about, the types of children are produced from these 9 forbidden relationships. Um, in most of these cases, when you have hatred between them, it's just the natural response is that you're not going to be together with your wife. I mean, what are we talking about? Kind of robots over here. Obviously, talking about people that hate God, right, and want to produce children when they hate each other. I mean, we're talking about real big Rishonim over here, wicked people, because normal people won't be together when they hate each other, when they're in fight. When you're in a fight with your wife, neither of you want to be together with the other person. You want to slap the other person. Hopefully, you don't slap each other, but you know, I don't condone physical violence, but uh, you're just not going to be together. You're at the opposite of being together. Being together is an expression of love, and when you hate each other, you're not going to be loving each other. So I think we have to figure out that there's a middle ground over here. Most couples live in this gray area of marriage, not gray area, there's a middle ground where there's not true love, and there's also not a true hatred. And even couples that are thinking about getting divorced, and they reconcile, I think that's okay, and you can live like that for many years. And many couples have lukewarm relationships. I think almost every couple has a lukewarm relationship. It's very rare to find a couple that actually love each other. Um, I want to just address one more issue um, about love. I've talked about in this chapter number 2 the difference between shalom and love, between peace and loving your wife. Peace is a bare minimum. You could have peace with people that are, were formerly your enemies. Now you made peace with them. You have cooperation in order to bring about, something that's mutually beneficial for both people. Doesn't mean you love them. Loving is a higher state. Um, there's two words when it comes to a couple. You hear, love and like. Do you like the girl? Does the girl like you? Usually when you're considering marrying a girl, uh, people who want to make sure you're making the right decision will ask, do you like her? Does she like you? The word like and the word love. And I think they're very different words when it comes to the relationship between a man and a woman. Love is an emotion. Um, and because this is a book about intimacy, and people call the act of being intimate making love, that's what it's called. The reason they call it making love is because it is maybe uh, the greatest facilitator of love, in that in the bedroom you have to show care and concern for the other person, for what they like and they want. And even on a deeper level is that when someone reveals a secret to you, or their biggest secret to you, right, that means you trust a person and you love that person. If you could reveal your biggest secret, revealing your giving up your whole body to another person, your private body, taking all your clothes off for the other person, um, and hugging and kissing in that situation. I don't get too graphic over here, but that's the ultimate love for the other person, that you love them. So it's making love to the degree that people are successful in the bedroom, the more love they'll have in their marriage, and that's what generates love, which is an emotion, which is a feeling, and it's a feeling which brings happiness. Happiness is also a feeling, but above that, and I'm strangely going to put the importance of like above love, because I believe this is true, is that as much as, right, people can love each other, right, it's very possible that even if you don't like um, a girl doesn't like you, right, which is very common, right? If you ask a man what girl he likes, usually a man likes a girl based on her physical appearance, her face, her nice body. That's how it's going to make a man like a woman. What's going to make a woman like a man? Usually, yes, good looks maybe, dress is nice, yeah, but an overall strong personality, or a strong personality, the stronger the man's personality, um, that's what attracts a woman to a man, and that's what causes her to like a man. Now, there's a lot of couples out there that get married for other reasons, right? They were friends, they don't like each other, and in the friend zone, or couples in the from shidduch world, they want to get married. They want to be like their peers and be married and have kids and have 12 kids. They want to be part of the circle, the social circle. So they get married for whatever reason. Or the Hasidim, they'll meet once or twice, a prearranged marriage, they'll get married. Do they like each other? Sometimes the parents will arrange a girl that doesn't look so nice, or a boy that's very shy and a nerd, But at the end of the day, they can still build love, because that's the opportunity given to you in the relationship of marriage, and more specifically in the bedroom, where you can make love and you could show that you care about the other person and reveal your innermost secret to the other person, and that generates love. It generates love, and there's different, madrega, different levels of love. The more love you show toward the other person, the more love you can build in the home, and that will generate happiness. Happiness is an emotion, which is, the more love a person feels, specifically a woman really, uh, love is very important to a woman. It'll foster more happiness. Liking a girl is something totally different. Liking a girl is attracted to her physical body, um, or a woman to the strong personality, the strong appearance of her husband. That's something else in the bedroom, and that really relates to what the Ramban talked about, having a cheshek, a desire in the bedroom. We'll get to this more as we go through the book, but it's important to distinguish that every couple has a possibility of loving the other spouse. Liking the other spouse is not available to everyone. Hopefully, that's why people ask, where you get married. Do you like her? Does she like you? Because you want to like each other, because that will create not just happiness or love in the bedroom, it'll create enjoyment, excitement, a great experience in the bedroom, which is a secondary aspect to the bedroom. I think it's the most important aspect of the bedroom, where you're getting physically and to a certain degree emotionally satisfied. Enjoyment, the emotion of enjoyment. Enjoyment is not an emotion. Enjoyment is emotion is a love. A happiness is an emotion. Enjoyment is a physical thing, and if you're attracted to a woman's attracted to you, then you'll be able to access that higher level, which is enjoying the union, enjoying the bedroom. And there's a lot to talk about it, how to enjoy the bedroom, or the significance of enjoying the bedroom, what you can do to make it better in the bedroom. But it's important to distinguish between liking someone and loving someone. Loving someone is possible for everyone, and it's largely dependent on how you act in the bedroom with care and concern. And you can have a great marriage. You can have a great marriage if you love each other, because not every person's attractive, not every girl's attractive, not every man has a strong personality. There's a lot of men with and nerds that don't have strong personalities. But it's possible to have love, and that's the gift of marriage. The gift of marriage that you're able to have a loving relationship with another person who really cares about you, and it's so important, for comfort as you go through life, to have that partner, you know, who you can rely on and who you can feel companionship with. Um, Liking someone is a very different thing. It's about enjoying the bedroom, excitement in the bedroom, having fun in the bedroom. Yes, that contributes a little bit to the love, but that's really more for the physical enjoyment. It's not possible in some unions. We'll talk more about that going forward, but the the main topic of this chapter is dealing with love, the emotion of love. And like I said, it's not necessary. It's not a necessary component for staying married and being intimate. Uh, but by staying together and being intimate, you're able to develop love more. And you should try to develop it, because it's a really great thing to have a loving marriage, because you feel secure that you're with another person. You're not living life on your own. You have companionship. And at the end of the day, a lot of times practically it makes sense to stay together, especially if you have young children. So get it. You're going to be in the relationship with the other person. You're living in the same house with the other person. At least try to make it as good a relationship as possible, just for the sole purpose of making your life better and easier for yourself. Not just a happy wife is a happy life. If you have a good relationship with your spouse, so it makes your life better. If you're forced to stay in a marriage because you don't want it to be terrible because you'll be divorced with young kids, at least make the best out of the bad situation and try to make it as good a marriage as possible. Hope you enjoyed tonight's share. Stay tuned for next week, chapter 5.